Hello, theology nerds. This is Trip, and this is the Theology Nerd Throwdown, where nerds come to throw down theologically. This is a Homebrewed Christianity podcast. Go check it out at homebrewedchristianity.com, where you can find other podcasts and other nerdy theological bits of excitement. This episode is sponsored by the official TNT publishing partner, Chalice Press. So when you think of, where am I going to get my books? Where am I going to get my curriculum? Where am I going to get some exciting, zesty, progressive Christian stuff? Check out Chalice. They paid for this podcast, so you don't have to. This week's podcast is a live one. It is one that the people at Progressive Youth Ministries Conference 2014 in Chicago experienced in the flesh, 3D low-tech style. It features an interview with Scott Paeth, which rhymes with faith, author of the Niebuhr Brothers, the Armchair Theologians Guide to the Niebuhr Brothers, that is. We talk about the Niebuhr Brothers. Then Tony Jones and I have a little battle of contraire, fraire, that most feisty and competitive game of arbitrary contrarian excitement, where we just argue about stuff to argue about it, and try to be funny and over the top. I will give you a heads up that when it does get to that portion of the podcast, if you don't want to listen to something that's rated PG-13, then don't listen to it. There you go. Last few things. If you enjoy this podcast, then go subscribe on iTunes and give it a 5-star review. That helps other people find it. Also, you should subscribe to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, where we interview most awesome people week after week. Do that. But it'd be helpful. Subscribe, review it. It's great. Share this brew. If you want to sponsor the podcast, you can do that just by clicking that PayPal donate button. And then you can help pay for this thing, just like our wonderful partners Chalice did. You can click on an Amazon link so that when you go buy the Armchair Theologians version of the Niebuhr Brothers by Scott Paeth, we get a percentage back. It doesn't change your shopping experience, but it helps us out. You see what I'm saying? We give you podcasts, and then you just click that little button over to Amazon, shop just like normal, but they give us the hookup. All right. So this is a Theology Nerd Throwdown, live from Progressive Youth Minister Conference in Chicago. I want to give a little shout out to the DJ that evening, Trey from Everyday Sunday. He did a lot more DJing than you hear, and it was a blast. I want to give a shout out to John Vest, who is one of the ministers at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, who was hosting that evening. That day, he not only set up a wonderful setup, wonderful tech, tons of hospitality and support, but he ensured that Revolution Brewing Company and Goose Island had beer present and on tap during the podcast. So some of Chicago's finest craft beer was there during the podcast. So, thank you, John. So without further ado, this is a Theology Nerd Throwdown, recorded live in Chicago with me, Tony Jones, Jonnie, impersonating Bo, and Scott Paeth. Prepare yourselves.
Starting off, Scott is going to give us a 45-second introduction of himself as I hold up 2 of his books, and then we will he'll be able to tell you about the book you're about to purchase through a Homebrewed Christianity Amazon link. All right. What's up, Scott? Can you tell me, what it means to be you in 45 seconds or less?
I'm not sure I know what it means to be me, so probably I can't do it in 45 minutes, but I can give you some highlights.
All right.
So...
say your last name.
Scott Paeth.
Paeth. See, I told you.
So it rhymes with faith, which works well for a theologian. It helped me out. It helped me out in my campaign to become the chaplain's aide when I was in Boy Scouts. It's like, no, really, faith and Paeth. So that last name Paeth. I'm associate professor of religious studies at DePaul University. I do a lot of work in Christian ethics, public theology, applied ethics, that kind of thing, business ethics, medical ethics. If it's got the word ethics in it, I'm probably doing it somewhere along the line.
And you're a Doctor Who fan.
I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. Yeah.
Okay, can I ask you a question, Scott?
Yeah.
Here's my question. How awesome is Jürgen Moltmann? Go.
He's super awesome.
Yeah! Okay, I'm done. I'm out of trip.
I actually thought I was here tonight to mediate the whole process versus Moltmann thing between you and Tripp.
You might be doing that here after a couple more beers.
We'll save that for the end. I don't want to hurt Tony early. Then I'd have to ride the ship myself. But there are 2 books here. Shaping Public Theology. Guess what? It's about public theology and shaping it. And the Niebuhr Brothers for Armchair Theologians. That means it's for everyone, because everyone is a theologian, right? Even Justin Bieber. I did think that we were discussing book titles yesterday, and I was thinking that if you reprint it, you should call it "Won't You Be My Niebuhr?"
Well, there was a joke when Reinhold was at Union that it was love your Niebuhr as yourself. And love Dodd above all things, because there was another professor there named Dodd, and so it was love Dodd above all things and love Niebuhr as yourself.
Praise
Scott,
the Lord.
let me ask you this, because where I went to seminary, and then when I went to for my doctoral work, I read a lot. I read almost no Niebuhr. We read almost no Niebuhr. At Fuller Seminary, Niebuhr was a name you learned in American church history class, but you didn't read in any theology class. And then at Princeton, it was all either how much you love Bart or how much you were totally over Bart. So there was one professor at Princeton who was doing a lot of Niebuhr, but what do you think the legacy of the Niebuhr brothers is going to be long term?
I honestly think the more I worked on this project, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this project was because we're in the midst of what a lot of people have called a Niebuhr revival. What they've said is, particularly after the complete disaster that was the Bush administration, and the sort of moral naivete and idealism that kind of motivated that whole regime. There were a lot of people like Andrew Bacevich and Arthur Schlesinger and other people who came around and they said, you know who had it right and who we've forgotten about was Reinhold Niebuhr, because he understood foreign policy in a way that allowed you to recognize the limitations of what you could do, even when what you wanted to do was some approximation of the right thing. And so that was the beginning of what became this Niebuhr revival. And then that really began to take off after this editorial in the New York Times that David Brooks wrote, in which he interviewed Barack Obama when he was still a candidate for the president, and Obama spoke glowingly of Reinhold Niebuhr. And so then David Brooks kind of started riding the Reinhold Niebuhr revival train largely on the basis of that editorial, and a lot of what Barack Obama is generally credited with and sometimes blamed for in terms of his own foreign policy is probably directly attributable to Reinhold Niebuhr. So if you like what Obama's been doing foreign policy-wise, at least largely, you probably have Niebuhr to thank for it. And if you don't like it, you probably have Niebuhr to blame for it.
Oh, there you go. Well, so Niebuhr is if you start to think of kind of liberal Protestant theologians in the United States, he came in with a very hefty critique to one of the greatest thing that's ever happened in the United States, which would be the social gospel movement. And as one of those endangered species called progressive Baptists, we don't get many. If Baptists are in church history, it's usually for being like the most racist and most bigoted, most sexist, the most anti-science, all that kind of stuff. Except social gospel movement, Walter Rauschenbusch. Is just he's like it's like Walter Rauschenbusch and MLK Jr. are on the wall of every progressive Christian person's house, and it wasn't mine. So before you kind of tell us how Niebuhr just didn't understand all the beauty that is Walter Rauschenbusch, could you kind of say where the relationship in America of political theology in the Protestant academic church, how it was born and where the social gospel movement came from?
Well, as I read the history, the social gospel movement really emerged out of the a particular strain in American Christianity, and Richard Niebuhr actually talks a lot about this in his books on American Christianity, which is the sort of idealistic social reformist stream, which goes back to the Quakers, it goes back to the Puritans, it goes back to the idea of the kingdom of God not simply being a question of sort of individual salvation or a question of sort of whether you're right with God in your soul, but ultimately is a question of whether or not you are engaged in a project of social reconstruction under the aegis of or inspired by a vision of the kingdom of God and how that manifests itself on earth. And, again, you can go back to the Puritans. You can go back to the Pilgrim Plantation. You can look at the Quakers. And you find the roots of the social gospel in all of that. The abolition movement, women's suffrage, all of those movements have roots in American Christianity and were strongly motivated by that sort of American Christian reformist heritage. It took on this particular name of the social gospel in the late 19th century, early 20th century, largely as a result of people like Shaler Matthews and Walter Rauschenbusch. And for them, they took it. They formalized it, I think, in a certain sense, theologically and ethically in a way that it hadn't been done before. It was an impulse prior to them, and then after them, it was a movement. And I think that what happens with Reinhold and Richard Niebuhr is they come into the story in the early part of the 20th century, right in the middle of and after World War I, very much part and parcel of that movement. They both of them identified strongly with that. They identified themselves with Christian socialism. In the 1920s, they traveled to Soviet Russia when it was newly born, and they saw a lot of potential there at the same time that they saw a lot of problems if you happen to be Christian. And they were really very rooted in this idea that you need to be engaged, practically speaking, in a project of social reform. But what happens, particularly for Reinhold, Richard goes in another direction, but particularly for Reinhold, he begins to become disillusioned because he's really more of a political radical than Richard is in some ways. He really wants to see concrete change now. And what he sees a problem in the social gospel, particularly as it's exemplified in some of his contemporaries, and like, for example, the editors at the time of the Christian Century sort of exemplified this, which is that in order to embody the social gospel, you have to embody a Christian ethic of love. And in order to embody a Christian ethic of love, you have to refrain from any and all kinds of coercion. The problem is that Reinhold, under the influence of Marx, to a large degree, he looks at that and he says, no, that completely misreads the social, political, ethical problem that we're faced with, which is that if you take coercion off the table, and we're not necessarily talking about violent coercion, nonviolent coercion as well as something precluded. If you take that off the table, then ruling elites, the people who are powerful, the rich, the bosses, right, the captains of industries, people like Henry Ford, they will never have an incentive to change. They will never have an incentive to give up any iota of their power unless they're forced to. Mm-hmm. And simply relying on moral suasion, simply relying on the persuasive power of the gospel as a means of getting people to change, while it may be effective on an individual level, Reinhold argues that's never going to be effective in securing large-scale social change.
Yeah. So could you just spell out briefly, like, he's famous for his doctrine of sin and differentiating the way sin functions in the individual and in the social. And I think that progressive Christians have kind of inherited the view of the social and then just ignored the individual. Could you kind of say his insight about both of them?
Sure. I mean, and again, this is sort of rooted in the same set of issues, that for Reinhold, individuals are capable of genuine self-giving love. They're capable of manifesting agape in their lives, in their social relations. But groups aren't. And what that means is that an individual can choose to engage in an act of self-giving love and in that way manifest in a sort of a total way what the ethic of Christianity is about. But because groups can't do that, institutions can't do that, and so the only thing that they have to fall back on is a conception of justice, because justice is about each party getting what they deserve and getting what they demand. Love, for Niebuhr, is about giving up justice for the sake of the other. And he says, in a society, you can never achieve love, but you can approximate love through the struggle for justice.
At this conference, the Progressive Youth Ministry Conference, where we're taping this podcast, there are many members of the Hauerwasian Mafia. A lot of dookies and a lot of resident aliens.
My blood pressure went up already once today about this.
All right, a lot of peculiar people.
And I apparently really bothered Andy Root's session by yelling at him.
So where, like, in the family tree, okay, in that kind of social gospel, Reinhold Niebuhr family tree, I think a lot of people probably in this room and listening probably to HBC are more familiar with the differences between, like, you've got the Hauerwasian Mafia and that kind of neo-Aristotelian view versus, like, radical orthodoxy versus process versus the more political theology of Jürgen Moltmann or something. Like, trace that family tree from that split in mid 20th century, early 20th century North America, Niebuhr versus social gospel to what kind of the landscape now.
Well, I mean, it really is sort of like 1,000 flowers blooming in a certain way, because, and actually, I think both Niebuhr brothers are complicit in that fragmentation.
Can you give us a quick mnemonic device or something to, like, H. Richard versus Reinhold? Like,
well, H. Richard. Well, okay, so.
Oh, this is good. Hauerwas likes H. Richard Niebuhr because of his book, The Meaning of Revelation.
That's interesting. I mean, to answer your mnemonic question, probably not. But okay, but how about this? I'll refer to H. Richard's actual given name was Helmut.
Helmut.
So if it makes it easier for you, I'll refer to him as Helmut.
When you say, how are they different? And then back to the today question, but, like, in a sentence or two, how do we, in our minds, how do we differentiate those two?
Reinhold, very much, the inheritors of Reinhold's tradition in America today are very much the sort of the public theology people, the people on the liberal end of the theological spectrum, sort of politically speaking, sort of people who are very much, you would find a lot more Niebuhrians, for example, in the mainline denominations. But even in the mainline denominations, you still have a lot of that sort of social gospel liberalism that doesn't like Reinhold's sort of allowance for things like coercion and violence. The Hauerwasian strain probably finds its roots back in Richard, back in Helmut. Yeah. I mean, and when I was writing this book, one of the things that was most surprising to me was to realize how Hauerwas comes out of what's called this Yale School of Theology, even though it probably is better called the Duke School of Theology these days.
Now it is.
And it shocked me to realize that what Hauerwas basically does, I don't know if he'd agree with this, but this is my reading of it, what Hauerwas basically does is he gloms onto one corner of Richard's theology, which is Richard's understanding of the church as he develops it in particularly the 1930s and 40s on the responsibility of the church for society, and some of what he writes in World War II about war as crucifixion and things like that. He basically grabs onto that idea of the church as a contrast society. The church is something that stands against the largest society and stands for values that are different from and distinguishable from the largest society.
The Hauerwasian Mafia in the room, they're like, you're preaching, baby. Preach it. Preach it.
Well, and I have to say, there's a large proportion of me that's very sympathetic to that perspective. I think that the church has to, in a certain regard, be a contrast society. And for me, that's the aspect of Moltmann that I like a lot, too. When Moltmann gets into that sort of Exodus church mode, then that's the aspect of Moltmann that I really glom onto. But at the same time, I think that if what you're talking about is the question of how the church actually enacts, morally speaking, the values that it upholds within the context of an ambiguous and fragmented society, how does it achieve partial success in a world where total success is impossible? Then I find myself gravitating to Reinhold. So, depending on which mood you catch me in, I can go for either one. I can hang with the Hauerwas Mafia from time to time, but at the end of the day, I'm a public theologian. I want to see how this stuff cashes out in terms of American public life.
There's a really, like, if you had to read one of the Niebuhr Brothers books, the one that's been most read is Christ in Culture, and it gives this like kind of list of different relationships of the church and culture, but. Presidents don't hang out with theologians anymore, and billionaires don't ask them how best to use their money, and politicians don't try to talk public theologians into being buddy-buddy with them. which I think is great that Christians don't go golfing with Pharaoh anymore. But back then that was there, and so maybe could you talk about how that kind of the typology of Christ in culture gets reworked in a kind of post-Christian, post-Christendom type of the United States? Like, as a public theologian, how do you understand the different ways we relate after culture dominance isn't the framework?
Well, the nice thing about that sort of Christ and culture framework is that it provides a sort of a quick and easy guideline for thinking about, well, is what I'm doing right now very much of culture? Is it against culture? Am I somehow working on a paradoxical relationship within them, or some combination thereof? Of course, one of the criticisms of that typology was always that really at the end of the day, Richard puts his cards down on the Christ transforming culture model, and that everybody who follows him basically says that they're also interested in Christ. Nobody really wants to be a Christ of culture guy, right? Everyone wants to be a Christ transforming culture guy. Right. And nobody really, and some people want to be a paradox guy. Some people want to say, well, really, I hold them in paradox, and I can be like that sometimes. But I think that at a stage now where Christianity has lost any genuine sense of cultural predominance, where pluralism is sort of sprouting up all over the place, within the church, outside of the church, in government, in all spheres of public life, I think the real question that Christianity has to ask is not, are we for culture? Are we against culture? Are we in paradox with culture? The real question we have to ask is, how do we creatively appropriate what's going on in culture? How do we this, I suppose, is a form of transformation. How do we look at the culture, find what within it is theologically vibrant, and how do we turn it toward that which will illuminate the kind of the presence and activity of Christ within the world, within the culture. And doing that means being willing to give up some degree of cultural hegemony, right? It means being willing to actually shut up for a little while, something I'm very bad at doing, and listen to what other cultural voices are saying, and figure out where Christ is speaking within that. I think that's sort of the genuine Niebuhrian place to stand in the midst of that kind of postmodern cultural pluralism that we're experiencing now.
So if you go to a more progressive seminary and you don't get assigned a Niebuhr book, you do get told that he ruined the doctrine of sin by emphasizing pride, and that a feminist critique of Niebuhr's doctrine of sin is that yes, Reinhold, who hangs out with famous and rich people and influential people, the root of sin is pride. But for, I don't know, half of the United States, maybe pride's not what is the root of our sin, but actually holding back and not leaning forward, not finding the power to share your voice and stuff. So I know that for me at Claremont and places like that, sometimes the insights of his Christian realism get critiqued because he's like the perfect, person to put off that feminist critique that's completely legitimate. So how is it that if you were sitting there talking to someone who has only experienced this negative criticism that you say, yes, that's completely right, but here's at least one thing we might think Riney had going for him?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's important to say that some of that criticism is valid, but a lot of it's not. And a lot of it is based on an image of Reinhold that I think does not actually stand up to scrutiny. He was involved to some degree with organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, and particularly in the World War II period, he was very much involved in active agitation on the part of the government. So for that period, he was very much in the midst of the corridors of power. But prior to that, in the 1920s and 30s, he was very much a political radical, very much standing on the outside of things, and very much making a prophetic critique of the social institutions that he was confronted with. He was now Marxist at a certain point in his career, and this was at a point in time where being an out-and-out Marxist was the kind of thing that got you the unwelcome attention of the FBI.
Unless you're at the Progressive Youth Ministry Conference.
Well, I'm not saying the FBI is not here. But, we know the NSA is.
Oh, snap.
But so on one hand, Reinhold was not the sort of master of power politics that I think a lot of people perceive him as being, although there was that dimension to him. Another part of the problem here is that what Reinhold said about pride was only half the story. Reinhold said there was two major ways that sin manifests itself in social life. Mm-hmm. One is the power of pride, where we assert ourselves over against other people and bend them to our will to power. The other way that sin manifests itself is through the power of self-abnegation, right? Through which we basically give up control, refuse to exercise our pride, and through refusing to exercise our own power within the world, we allow events to overtake us. And he uses examples of what were things that were contemporary to his own age, things like alcoholism and things like that. We could apply it to drug addiction and other things here. But I think the feminist critique that says that Reinhold was all about pride and wasn't concerned with the idea of the way in which power is taken away through the denial of legitimate power misreads a certain portion of his thought. It doesn't completely misread it, but it misreads it in enough of a way as I think to distort his theology. Mm-hmm. It's also worth noting that one of the last things that he wrote, and unfortunately, this actually may serve to prove the point that you were making. It was actually something that he co-wrote with his wife Ursula, but as often happened at this time, she didn't get any credit for it. But it was something he wrote in the Christian Century, and it was a critique of the practice of the Nixon administration of inviting preachers to come and speak in the East Room of the White House. And he wrote an article for the Christian Century in which he said, I wonder if Martin Luther King, had he not been killed, would he have been invited to these East Room confabs with the president? Would he have been invited to preach to the president? Or would he have been more like the prophet Amos, right, who was told, go back to your own country and don't come preaching around here because we're not interested in your message. Mm-hmm. And implicit in that was that preachers like Billy Graham, who was invited to the East Room, really had been the ones who had really accommodated themselves to the political climate of the day.
At what point did public theology shift from being something the church wanted its academically gifted and called people who spend lots of time reading and thinking about it to ministers with an 80 IQ that have a great hair gel products and are on TV? To me, I could think of 50 people. Max Stackhouse, who when everyone goes by shaping public theology and read his stuff, why doesn't he get invited? Why doesn't there are so many people that don't get the public platform that before are actual academics and people that were called vocationally to be theologians were the ones that the church looked to for advice. Now, we have hardball talking about Joel Osteen quotes as if he's somehow the one the church looks at for public policy.
Honestly, at the end of the day, I think it's a failure of the church. It's a failure of the church to make a credible message that is publicly persuasive, that people want to hear, and one that is translatable into the context of public discussion. You have a few people who can do it. Jim Wallace can do it. Cornel West can do it. Nadia Bolz-Weaver can do it. I mean, there are a few other people like that who really know how to translate that stuff. And they're not all mainline liberal Christians. Some of them are evangelical. A lot of them are evangelical. But they're not evangelical in a Joel Osteen prosperity gospel way. They're evangelical in the sense of recognizing that the gospel and preaching of Jesus Christ and his life and his death and his resurrection mean something in the context of the totality of human life, right? And those people, whether they're tweeting or whether they're on blogs or whether they're writing for the Christian Century or Christianity Today, wherever they are, when they are penetrating that sort of cultural zeitgeist, then they're doing public theology. Mm-hmm. But they get drowned out by the Joyce Meyers and the Joel Osteens and the prosperity gospelers and the people who go to the political consultants and they say, I may have crap for theology, but you know what I have? I have a constituency.
Yeah.
And I have a political base. And so you better invite me to the White House and listen to what I have to say because I control votes.
And here's why. Here's one of the reasons I said I'm pretty sure that anyone that came to this conference, I would rather America hear your input about justice, public policy, and stuff as an example of the church than Joel Osteen. And I'm 100% confident that if you shared your heart, it would be more beautiful and it would be more robust. You'd be confident about a God of love and justice. And I think part of the way people get there is just being confident enough to share their voice, and it resonates with other people. So it may not be, of course, like a podcast, but obviously this was a freaking like hobby that turned into 17,000 people listening to me talk for nerdy like. So whatever platform it is that you can share your voice and become public, I think now we don't need 2 or 3 people, right? Like Niebuhr, Tillich, Bart, or whatever. We need thousands of people who are willing to tell the good news from where they are. And you don't have to be like, a hyper extrovert with a huge ego that gets at conferences and brings kegs in so you can listen to them talk. You could be anything. It could be Twitter, or it could be Facebook. It could be poetry. It could be art. It could be short documentaries. There's so many different things. So I think that we need to let our students do that, and they can become public theologians, and that we can do it too. And as youth ministers, I found that the most beautiful things at my church have been when my youth thought it was okay to use their voice to tell the congregation. I think it's stupid that we don't cover our gay ministers' partners' health benefits just because California hasn't overturned Prop 8 yet. Don't use shitty a public policy for our state that we all make fun of in sermons as reasons not to cover his partner's health. Now, I could have said that and I would have been worried about my insurance. But the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old who showed up at the meeting and said it, no one says anything because they know it's completely right. So that, to me, I think that one of the heirs of Niebuhr is really going to be us as Christians being confident in where we are and telling the truth as we believe it at one moment, and then telling it with passion. So
I have a final question for you.
Oh, sorry, Jonnie.
And it's right on that same point about Niebuhr. A couple of us were talking, and considering how these kids are already like kind of basically imbibing and living Niebuhr based on what Tripp just said, can I get you to commit to writing a popular level introduction to Niebuhr's thought entitled "Won't You Be My Niebuhr" for 14-year-olds?
14-year-old, or just a blog post.
This one is not necessarily pitched at 14-year-olds, but what it does has friendly cartoons.
Cartoons.
Cartoons with Nazis.
And
That's awesome.
It's got cartoons with Nazis. I mean, and I have to tell you, I have loved since I was a small child reading Plato. I have loved philosophy and theology books that have cartoons in them. So this one may not necessarily be bedtime reading for your 14-year-old, but it is more user-friendly than the average introduction to Reinhold Niebuhr.
All right, join me in thanking Scott. Hold the books up again. Oh, that's right. If you have an Amazon app, you can right now go and get them. So here's what we're going to do. So we're gonna play a tune, refill our glasses, and then just assume that we're jumping to the PG-13 level of the podcast. It's packed full of excitement. And if you have any more questions, make sure that they get to Jonnie soon so that we can get them in for the fun. Up next, Au Contraire, mon frère.
Okay, so that was Scott Paeth, rhymes with faith. And now we move into the PG portion of the Homebrew Live show. Au contraire, mon frère.
I would like to welcome my Au contraire, mon frère rival, senior elder Tony Jones, but he seems senior deacon, but we are going to give you an ontological elevation, even though we deny ontological reality to hierarchical church status, but we do ontology when it comes to God. All right, so Jonnie is sitting in, so someone still is not going to be able to get in their room. Just if you know somebody, if they start texting you like, dude, I didn't go to the Homebrewed thing, but I'm locked out here.
Tim.
Because my buddy, Jonnie, is sitting in for the very one and only Bo Daddy, my normal sidekick. And because Tony is now making his 10th appearance on the podcast after 6 years.
Woo!
Now, only 7 of them made it to air.
What?
Only 7 made it to air.
True.
I would like to ordain 2 new elders to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. So if I could get some theme music, that would be great. Now, Jonnie, could you please take it away as we begin?
Right.
The one and the only contraire mon frere, and make sure the people who have never experienced the game know what's happening.
Oh, contraire, mon frere!
This game is called Au Contraire, Mon Frere. It goes against my personality to be the moderator, so I'm going to pretend to be Bo Sanders with a voice that's 3 times higher in octave. Which,
3? Dude.
right.
Like 7.
All right. Elder of assness right here. You heard it here first.
It could
So
be a
this
sexy
game
assness.
is basically, it's the 4th, 5th installment, 3rd, 4th, what? It's
Something
happened
like
many
that.
times.
It's happened
become
before.
Popular. The idea is I pose a statement that's going to be offensive or annoying to someone or everyone in the room. And if I give it to Tony or if I give it to Tripp, they have to choose a stance. They have to say yay or nay and defend that for 1 minute. So basically, they have to pick a position on these statements. These are all going to be youth ministry related, loosely, and also some current events. You probably will be offended or annoyed at one of them. They're written to be that way. Some of them are crowdsourced. They're not all from me. Anyway, they each have 1 minute to defend themselves. There is a secret word that if they mention that, like a relevant word that I don't ask in the question, they will immediately win that round. If they don't, at the end, you guys will decide. I'll say, Tony, does he win or does Tripp win? And you guys decide, okay?
I
So
just
there's-
would like for you to know that you only paid $15 to come in here tonight and it included beer and you get to take the glass home.
Okay, so the first question.
Who goes first?
Yeah.
I'm trying to decide.
Oh, my God.
All right, this question is to Tripp Fuller.
All right.
Tripp,
Yep.
crowdsourced question here. Let's face it, seminary is antiquated. The only true credentials you need to minister to youth is a subscription to Relevant Magazine, an annual pilgrimage to Andy Stanley's Catalyst Conference, and a Starbucks card.
Absolutely not. Seminary is great for youth ministry because the rest of the mainline church doesn't always necessitate having a critical, creative thinker on the ground doing theology with people who tell you the truth and all that kind of stuff. But youth ministry actually does. Because youth don't care if their grandma's been there a long time or any of that. They want you to be honest and forward with them. They want you to help to deal with their shit in their lives and the doubts that they're facing. And without a theological education, maybe hanging out with Andy Stanley and leading Relevant Magazine, you can come up with really cool games and sermon illustrations based off, I don't know, the Lego movie. But you won't actually be able to invite them into a living and life-giving relationship with God that is actually coheres with the actual world that they live in. So I support theological education hardcore.
Less than a minute. That's the first time that's ever happened in your life since you were in first grade. You're
I'm
under
saving the
time.
seconds for another question.
Tony.
Au contraire, mon frere.
Oh,
I was just pulled out my iPhone here and pulled out the calculator, and I was calculating that if you go to seminary and you come out with, let's say, $40,000 worth of debt, you get a youth pastor job, let's say, $32,000 a year, that according to my calculation, it's going to take 128 years for you to pay off your residential seminary education. The last thing that a youth worker needs in a day of open source theological education where you can come to kick-ass events like Progressive Youth Ministry. That's what I'm talking about. You can learn about radical theology and process theology, and you can learn about transgender theology and queer theology. You can learn about how to read the Bible, WTF. You can learn as much by open sourcing it, going to the Cana Initiative, going to other places that are all around where people are open sourcing theological education.
5
You
seconds.
do not need to go to an ATS, hashtag snake eating its own tail, hashtag seminary.
All right. The special word was not hit. It was goatees. Unfortunately, that is Now we're voting. Those who say, Tripp, who defends going and spending lots of money at seminary because that is what turns you on, does Tripp win the vote there or not?
Yeah!
Oh, yeah.
Or does
all the
Tony
seminary
Jones,
professors
who
go-
does bad math but did a pretty good job saying it? Okay. So someone keep count. Tony has 1 point.
Someone keep track. You can't ask questions and count at the same time.
Okay.
He was a Fuller grad.
Okay, this one is for Tony. Okay. A truly good youth ministry will always meet kids where they're at. For this reason, you should always do at least one series on the end times and one series on sex every year. Now that's relevant.
No. That statement is patently false. Firstly, because it ends in a preposition. It's terrible grammar, which can clearly only come from evangelical youth ministry, because progressive youth workers are far too educated to speak in such a manner.
Now that's relevant as a sentence.
What?
There's no comma there. That's its own sentence.
No. Meet kids where they're at. That's the grammatically incorrect sentence.
That's not the end of the sentence.
It's a grammatically incorrect clause. You
Who
can't have a
wants a youth
clause. You
minister
can't even
as
add
big
a
of an
clause in a
asshole as Tony
preposition.
Jones?
All right? You can't even add a clause in a preposition.
You're wasting your
Hashtag
time.
charter school.
Hashtag modernism.
Teacher.
Hashtag 15 seconds.
Hashtag the last thing you need to do is topical, baby. Do the Bible. Forget topical. That's the future youth ministry.
Trip?
Au contraire, mon frere. Sex is in the Bible, so if you're going to talk about the Bible, you'll have to talk about it. Unlike most Christians in the world that don't know that sexuality is in the Bible, you should probably deal with it. Great object lesson. Really sexually problematic males edited the Bible. They edited all kinds of things out. You should hang out with Phyllis Tribble and help her redo the text of terror with your youth. I've done it. You would be amazed at all the conversations that come up when you just deal with sex as it's in the Bible. It gives awkward teens a way to discuss what they're dealing with without actually telling you the full truth and nothing but the truth in front of your peers, and it opens up avenues for you to have more personal conversations later. Yes, you should talk about the end times, because I work at a UCC church in L.A. where they're as likely to be into crystals as they are to have a friend that's convinced them that the eschatology of premillennial dispensationalism is something that all Christians believe.
10 seconds.
That is the biggest piece of BS of all time, and it ruins tons of people's possibility of thinking Jesus might be cool. So if you don't deconstruct it every year and tell them that God is in the business of making all things new, then you suck as a youth minister.
Do we need to vote? Okay, yeah, let's just go ahead and vote. Those that vote for Tony. Those that vote for Tripp. Oh! Okay, 1-1. Okay, Tripp. This is also a crowdsourced question. Conservative models of youth ministry do a better job creating community and a sense of purpose than airy-fairy liberal youth groups. This is just a fact.
It's not a fact.
Not done.
Oh.
That church over there that looks like a mini Superdome has way more kids in it than this old building.
It may or may not, because this is a big-ass building. But it's not a fact that it's better at building community. When you have a giant youth group that attracts all sorts of people, it actually prioritizes one personality, people that are into competitive games, telling crazy stories, extroverts, and all that kind of thing. And then, in fact, that what teenagers need is not 60 people eating bananas through a pantyhose, but is actually just 6 people to give a shit when they're being honest. And that can happen in all sorts of places. The biggest problem facing progressive youth ministry is that the parents of the kids don't have 6 people they can be honest with. And that's the senior minister's problem. So when they look at you and go, why don't you play more games like the megachurch so you can be shallow and shit like that? Then you should say, why don't you have one room in the church that is always filled every night with 6 people telling the truth about their lives and God's grace going all over the place? Because I think that progressive youth ministries are the places why people stay in the church and they go, I remember when I was in a youth group and they're 50 at my church and they haven't told the truth to anyone since then.
End time.
Tony.
Did you say end times?
I said and time.
Oh.
Ampersand time.
Au contraire, mon frère. I don't know what world you live in, but some kind of proleptic eschatological hope. Because in the real world, kids go to conservative youth groups because conservative youth groups know how to talk about God and Jesus and the Bible. They help students to navigate the crazy pluralistic high schools in which they live. Adolescents struggle for self-identity. Mamby-famby, airy-fairy, liberal, elitist, progressive churches struggle to articulate anything distinctive. It's what we're here talking about all week. And it's what everybody in the room agrees on, that we need to get better at articulating what is distinctive about an inclusive gospel in which everyone is included. That has been a very difficult thing, and the reason that students go to conservative evangelical youth groups is not because of the games and not because of the facility, but because of the distinctiveness in Jesus Christ that is preached.
Those who think that Tony took it there, arguing for the conservative model of youth ministry, whether it's right or wrong, it does get more kids. Go now.
Yes!
You guys are...
Even the roots over there through
He
the
may
crickets
have
up.
the numbers, but he does not have the cheers. Anyone who votes for Tripp on that one, go. So that must have not been a very good
It
question.
doesn't matter.
Whoever wrote that.
This is a
certainly
straight
don't.
binary either or.
Okay, now you guys are gonna have to put some flesh in the game.
Oh.
Next question. This question. Who did I go to last time? You. This goes to Tony. Peter Rollins is totally a Christian.
Oh yeah, baby. Peter Rollins is totally a Christian. Because I want to just tell you personally, and I know Peter Rollins as a friend. When the microphone is off, Peter Rollins, I shit you not, Peter Rollins sings praise songs. He prays to Jesus. He speaks in tongues. I am not kidding. He does acts of service and charity. That whole freaking, the hair sweepy and the, parables he gets halfway through and then forgets what he's talking about and talks about something else. It is completely fake. It's a lie, right? It's like his alter ego. He's Andy Kaufmaning you, friends. It is totally BS. The dude has got topical memory system verses in his car. While he's at stoplights, he is memorizing verses from the Navigators, okay? Peter Rollins is a Christian.
Wow. 10 seconds to spare.
Au contraire, mon frère. Peter Rollins is not what all the adjectives you added. Totally a Christian. Because only an atheist can be a real Christian if you're Peter Rollins. We live a mile apart. He is currently doing the Homebrewed Christianity online class, Atheism for Lent, with Bo right now. And when he gets done with Lent, his life is more difficult as a theist than an atheist. He does psychoanalysis, and he explains the religious phenomena with the unconscious, which has no verifiable evidence in the world. It's just the thing you use to materialize religion. And then he looks at you and is like, oh, yeah, doubt and paradox and blah, 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 blah. He says all that stuff because he's just trying to lure you into being an atheist materialist who wants to do the politics of Jesus. That's because he's not a Christian. Now, he is my favorite type of atheist because he reads the Bible. But he is a hashtag Caputo.
Whoa,
hashtag Altizer.
I object.
He's not doing a good job. I'm taking advantage of his not bow.
No one got the secret phrase, which is those who vote for Tony Jones, who says that Peter Rollins is totally
Navigator.
He said navigators first.
He said
of
a
all,
charismatic Christian.
Yeah.
Speaking tongues Christian, Peter Rollins is. I'm telling
Those
you.
who vote for Tony.
Could you all tweet that stuff and hashtag it high gravity so it goes across the Twitter stream in the high gravity class right now? At Jones Tony says he speaks in tongues. Hashtag high gravity.
Tripp Fuller, who argues that Peter Rollins is totally not a Christian. He said he's his favorite kind of atheist because he totally reads the Bible.
I said that he's my favorite type of atheist.
Those who vote for that ambiguous statement, go now.
I just want you to know that that I at least didn't lie.
So it's 2-2.
Okay, this is a trip question. Say what you will, the concept and kick-ass song, Jesus Freak, is still a vibrant, effective, engaging way to inspire Christian youth today.
No. Jesus Freak assumes the very worst thing about evangelicals, that they're somehow the oppressed minority, and that when you come out being like a gay-hating, science-hating, racist piece of shit, but you don't say the racist part, that somehow you're being oppressed because of your faith. The people I know that love that junk happen to be like the Christians I never wanted to hang out with. And so, like, if you were like the person that's like, I'm a Jesus freak and people don't like me because I want science class to tell everything that the world's 6,000 years old or whatnot, then, well, don't have an opinion about science class because you're not going to pass it. So, like, to me, Jesus freak creates the possibility that in the United States, conservative evangelicals don't have a voice. They've actually rigged the entire fucking United States Congress so that they get to have people that are on the science board in the House and the Senate who think that Noah's covenant is the reason climate change isn't a big deal. And people say I'm strange because I was born in the manger. People say I'm strange. Does it make me...
Hey! Cut the mic off.
Tony?
Au contraire, mon frère. My friends, if I may, have more poignant lyrics ever been penned? Kamikaze. My death is gain. I've been marked by my maker, a peculiar display.
Oh.
The high and lofty, they see me as weak, but I won't live and die for the power they seek.
Preach.
Platinum.
There was a man from the desert with naps in his head.
Bob Marley.
The sand that he walked was also his bed. The words that he spoke made the people assume there wasn't too much left in the upper room.
It is true about Toby Mac.
With skins on his back and hair on his face. They thought he was strange by the locusts he ate. The Pharisees tripped when they heard him speak. He took the head of this Jesus.
10 seconds.
Amen, brothers and
10
sisters.
seconds.
What was the special word?
What was
well, you did hit it. Oh, on fire and hilltop experience were the two words. I don't know. Neither of you were really on fire, but we do have to take a vote. Those who think that Tripp is right, that Jesus Freak is horrible as a concept for inspiring youth. That's a medium. Those who think Tony's recitation of those lyrics that are burned into your brain.
Why don't you just read Rocket Man to us? Like,
I'd be happy to if it meant a point. William Shatner hashtag.
Okay, two more.
Oh, this isn't going good.
3-2. Tripp 2, Tony 3. This one goes to Tony.
Bring it.
The Matrix.
Oh, baby, you're singing my language.
And
Come
the
on,
Lord
bring
of
it.
the Rings are without a doubt the most richly theological, non-canonical works ever made.
Oh, baby. My flip phone rang. I answered it. Doug Padgett from the lobby of the Edina Theater said, I have just seen a movie. In 2 hours, it explained everything we've been talking about in Terra Nova for 2 years. The Matrix answered everything. The Matrix is responsible for the beginning and birth of the emergent church movement. Unequivocally, okay? Unequivocally. And Lord of the Rings is responsible for the end of the emerging church movement.
Mic drop.
But, like, it was written, like... You're talking about the movie, right?
Movie, the
Did you know that it was a book,
books.
though?
We're not books.
There's
no,
like
books.
3 or 4. Okay.
We're post-book.
Very emergent.
Au contraire, mon frere. I'm pretty sure that if we pick non-canonical works to be really close to canonical ones and they happen to be movies or texts that aren't in Scripture, it should be one that are created not by special effects, privileged, expensive people in the West. And that should definitely not be The Matrix, because The Matrix is trying to deal with the privileged person's obsession with Gnosticism. If you've ever listened to the trilogy with the philosophical commentary, which I have and do every Christmas, I'm sorry, I may or may not do that. But it definitely should not reach non-canonical status, because when I watch The Matrix now, those special effects look like crap. But when I read the Gospel of Luke these days, it still preaches the shit out of me. And so I really think that movies should not reach canonical status or almost there, simply for the fact that the actual stories of Jesus and the radical political theology of Paul are the things we need to go back to, not watching movies that make post-evangelicals that want to come out of their skin excited.
Time! That's unbelievable.
Neither of the special words were hit. One was to speak like Keanu Reeves, and the other was to say something about Aslan was the other option.
I totally should have had Aslan.
Given that, those who think that Tony is right and they're emergent fans that The Matrix started the emergent movement,
It totes
cheer now.
That's what all the bloggers online said.
Those who think that Tripp is right, we need to go to the radical political theology of Paul and not movies, cheer now. That's enough. That's enough. Tepid victory.
It's either or, Tony. It's
All
either
of
or.
Tripp's victories have been tepid.
Okay, last question, and this goes to...
This is the rubber match.
It's
this
3
goes
to 3.
Tripp. This is going to take me about 4 minutes to read, but I need to listen closely.
So basically what you're saying is everyone should listen to the final question, because it's like Final Jeopardy without the music.
Yeah, this is...
We need a posture of
Can
attentiveness.
you get like a low, like a...
Sentimental music.
Yeah, sentimental...
Like tension, softness.
Yeah, like tense, soft innuendo-ish music.
Yeah.
She who has ears, let her hear this.
Yeah, all I know is that, Jonnie, if this question sucks, people are going to be like, really?
This past Monday, @Pastor Mark came out publicly in a story leaked by Reddit and picked up by the Huffington Post, by which the Christian Twitterverse has become divided, as he has vowed to spend a year in the dark going deeper with his best friend. He has surrounded himself with a group of males, elders, who have promised to hold him up in order to become a more probing spiritual daddy for all the men under him. He has apologized for the misuses of his members' credit card information. This apology was a valid admission and clearly showed @Pastor Mark's growth. What say you, Tripp Fuller, about that valid admission?
I would like to say, though you may not have managed this game quite like the Bo Daddy, I would like to give all my points to you for coming up with that question.
I similarly forfeit all of my points to Johnny Russell, the new champion of Au Contraire, mon frère!
And I win. I take all those points you said you give me.
Yeah!